The piercing screams of Robert's friend echoed over the phone, his mother yelling, "They're coming in the house, lock the doors," before the line went dead. Ullian student Primus swallowed hard, looking up from his cafeteria seat at the new human exchange student that had the whole school buzzing. The human's name was Robert Burns, and he came from the infamous Deathworld Earth. Primus had heard the crazy rumors about Earth: vicious wild animal attacks, destructive weather catastrophes, chaotic resource wars. But he always scoffed them off as tall tales. No species could actually survive long on a hellhole planet like that. Right? "Did you hear? Robert is from Earth itself. They say he grew up in active war zones dodging bullets and explosions," Primus's friend Xyloth excitedly whispered, sliding into the seat across from him. Primus was about to dismiss Xyloth's ridiculous claims when a tall, muscular figure confidently strode into the cafeteria, Robert Burns in the flesh. All conversation stopped as the humans scanned the room. Primus froze when Robert's gaze landed on him and Xyloth. To Primus's shock, Robert walked right up to their table with a friendly grin. "Hi there, I'm Robert, great to meet you." He extended a hand to Primus in the human greeting custom. Primus hesitantly shook it, wincing at Robert's crushing grip. Xyloth burst out, "Is it true you're really from Earth? Is it actually a death world like everyone says?" Robert released a booming laugh and dropped into the chair next to shell-shocked Primus. "Well, I guess that depends what you consider a death world. To us humans, it's just called home." He leaned back casually, but there was a deadly serious glint in his eyes. Primus and Xyloth gaped at each other in disbelief, before eagerly leaning in, keen to hear more. Robert smirked and cracked his knuckles. "Let me tell you about the time I went camping as a kid and accidentally wandered into a bear's territory." As he began recounting his astonishing tales, Primus couldn't help but wonder, could frail Ullians like him even survive a day in Robert's brutal world? And if the rumors of a looming attack on Ullia were true, would they soon find out? Robert's eyes lit up with excitement as he launched into the tale. There I was, this scrawny 12-year-old kid, out in the middle of the woods. I had wandered away from my campsite to explore, like the curious little adventurer I was. So I'm walking along this narrow trail surrounded by towering pines, when all of a sudden I hear this deep, rumbling growl. Primus and Xyloth exchanged wide-eyed glances, already enraptured by the story. I froze in my tracks, heart pounding out of my chest. Slowly I turned my head, and there it was, a massive grizzly bear, standing on its hind legs, easily 10 feet tall. It was staring right at me, baring its teeth in a snarl. Robert grinned. "Well, I'll tell you what I didn't do. I didn't run. That's the worst thing you can do when facing a bear. No, I remembered what my dad always taught me. Stand your ground, make yourself look big, and make a lot of noise." So that's exactly what I did. I slowly raised my arms above my head, making myself as tall as possible. Then I started shouting at the top of my lungs, trying to sound as fierce and intimidating as my prepubescent voice would allow. Primus shook his head in disbelief. "And that actually worked? The bear just left?" "Believe it or not, it did." The bear huffed, dropped back down to all fours, and lumbered off into the woods. I was shaking like a leaf, but I knew I couldn't let my fear get the best of me out there. It was a close call, but I survived. Xyloth let out a low whistle. Incredible. I can't even imagine facing down a predator like that, especially as a child. Robert laughed. Oh, that was just the beginning of my camping adventures. There was also the time I accidentally stumbled into a pack of wolves. Primus held up a hand. "Wait, wolves? I've been studying Earth's wildlife, and I know that wolves are highly intelligent, social predators that often hunt in packs. How in the world did you survive that encounter?" Robert's expression turned serious. "Well, it was a close call, that's for sure. I was hiking alone in the mountains when I heard howling in the distance. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then I saw them, a whole pack of wolves, maybe 6 or 7 of them, emerging from the trees." Primus and Xyloth held their breath, waiting for Robert to continue. The human leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "They started circling me, snarling and snapping their jaws. I knew I was in trouble. Wolves are incredibly smart and they work together as a team. I had to think fast. Robert nodded grimly as he continued the story, the memories of that harrowing night still fresh in his mind. I knew I had to act fast. Those wolves were closing in, and I didn't have much time. I frantically scanned my surroundings, looking for any kind of shelter or escape route. That's when I spotted it, a narrow crevice between two large boulders, just big enough for me to squeeze into. Primus leaned forward, his eyes wide with anticipation. You mean they actually chased you? How did you manage to get away? Robert chuckled, a glint of mischief in his eye. Well, I had to get creative. I remembered I had a lighter and some dry moss in my backpack, left over from my last camping trip. I quickly gathered the moss at the entrance of the crevice and set it ablaze, creating a makeshift barrier of smoke and flames. Xyloth's jaw dropped in disbelief. Wait, so you started a fire, and that actually kept the wolves at bay? For a while, yeah, Robert nodded. The wolves didn't like the smoke and flames, so they backed off a bit, but they didn't leave entirely. They paced around the rocks, growling and snarling, waiting for me to come out. It was like they knew they had me cornered. Primus shuddered at the thought. So what did you do then? How long were you stuck there? Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair. I ended up spending the night in that crevice, keeping the fire going and rationing my water and snacks. It was a long, tense night. I couldn't sleep a wink, knowing those wolves were just outside, waiting for me to let my guard down. But eventually, as the hours ticked by, the wolves gave up and moved on. I guess they figured I wasn't worth the trouble. Xyloth shook his head in amazement. And then what happened? How did you get out of there? When dawn came, I cautiously made my way back to the trail, keeping a sharp eye out for any signs of the wolves. I was exhausted, hungry, and more than a little shaken up, but I was alive, and that's what mattered. Primus sat back in his chair, trying to process everything he had just heard. I can't believe you survived not one, but 2 encounters with deadly predators. Are all humans as tough and resourceful as you? Robert laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to fill the room. Well, I don't know about that, but I will say that growing up on Earth, you learn to expect the unexpected. You never know what challenges life is going to throw your way, so you have to be ready to adapt and overcome no matter what. Xyloth grinned, leaning in eagerly. Speaking of unexpected challenges, didn't you mention something about getting caught in a flash flood while rock climbing in the desert? Robert's eyes lit up with excitement, and he rubbed his hands together in anticipation. Oh man, that's a story and a half. So there I was, halfway up this sheer cliff face, when all of a sudden... Primus and Xyloth leaned in eagerly as Robert began recounting his perilous ordeal in the Amazon rainforest. Now, this was during my gap year when I decided to do some solo backpacking through South America, Robert explained, his eyes gleaming with excitement at the memory. I had been trekking through the jungle for a few days, relying on my survival skills to navigate and find food and water. But on the 4th day, I woke up to find that my compass and map had been stolen by some mischievous monkeys during the night. Xyloth's eyes widened in disbelief. Wait, so you were stranded in the middle of the Amazon without any way to navigate? How did you find your way out? Robert grinned, leaning back in his chair. Well, I had to get creative. I knew that the Amazon River flowed eastward, so I figured if I could find the river, I could follow it downstream until I reached civilization. Primus furrowed his brow, trying to imagine the scene. But how did you find the river without a compass or map? I had to rely on my knowledge of the natural world, Robert explained. I knew that certain plants and animals tended to congregate near water sources, so I started looking for signs of them. I also used the position of the sun to get a rough idea of which direction was east. Xyloth shook his head in amazement. And that actually worked? You found the river? Robert nodded, a hint of pride in his voice. It took a couple of days of wandering, but yeah, I eventually stumbled upon the Amazon. From there, it was just a matter of following the river and rationing my supplies until I reached a small fishing village. Primus sat back in his chair, marveling at the ingenuity and resourcefulness that Robert had displayed. I can't even imagine being in that situation and having the presence of mind to come up with a plan like that. Is that kind of quick thinking and adaptability common among humans? Robert chuckled, running a hand through his hair. I think it's something that we've had to develop as a species, given the unpredictable nature of our planet. When you grow up knowing that anything from natural disasters to wild animal attacks could happen at any moment, you learn to think on your feet and make the most of whatever resources you have available. Xyloth nodded thoughtfully. It's just incredible to me, the kind of challenges that humans have had to overcome just to survive on Earth. I mean, between the predators, the natural disasters, and the sheer unpredictability of it all. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, Robert agreed, a note of solemnity creeping into his voice. But I think those challenges have also shaped us as a species. They've made us resilient, adaptable, and resourceful in ways that many other species in the galaxy simply haven't had to be. Primus leaned forward, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. You know, hearing your stories has really given me a new perspective on humanity. I used to think of Earth as this primitive, barbaric place, but now I see that there's so much more to it than that. The fact that humans have not only survived but thrived in such a hostile environment is a testament to your strength and ingenuity as a species. Robert smiled, a warm, genuine expression that seemed to light up his whole face. That means a lot, Primus. I know that humans have a bit of a reputation in the galactic community, but I hope that by sharing my experiences, I can help to bridge some of those gaps in understanding. Xyloth grinned, raising his glass in a toast. Well, here's to human resilience and adaptability. May we all learn a thing or two from your incredible species. As the three of them clinked their glasses together, Robert couldn't help but feel a swell of pride for his home planet and all that humanity had accomplished. Sure, Earth might be a tough place to live, but it had also forged a species of survivors, innovators, and explorers, a species that was just beginning to make its mark on the galactic stage. You know, Robert said, a mischievous glint in his eye, speaking of human ingenuity, did I ever tell you about the time I jury-rigged a distress beacon out of some scavenged parts after crash landing on an uncharted moon? Primus and Xyloth exchanged looks of awe as Robert began his next incredible tale. The human leaned forward, his eyes taking on a distant look as he recalled the memory. So I was on a research expedition in the Amazon rainforest, studying the diverse plant life and insect species. One day, while I was out collecting samples, I somehow managed to get separated from my team and found myself completely lost in the dense jungle. Robert began, his voice low and intense. Primus furrowed his brow. But how did you manage to navigate in such a dense, disorienting environment? I can't even imagine being in that situation. Robert smiled, a hint of pride in his expression. Well, I had to rely on my knowledge of the stars and my understanding of the rainforest's natural patterns. I knew that certain species of trees tended to grow in specific directions, and I could use the position of the sun and stars to get a rough idea of which way was north. Xyloth nodded, clearly impressed. So you navigated your way back to camp using nothing but your wits and your knowledge of the environment? Robert chuckled, shaking his head. Not exactly. I spent a couple of days making my way through the jungle, foraging for food and water, and using my skills to stay safe from the various predators and poisonous plants. But eventually, I stumbled upon a small river that I recognized from our maps of the area. Primus's eyes widened in realization. And you followed the river back to camp? Bingo, Robert grinned. I knew that our base camp was set up downstream, so I built a makeshift raft out of fallen logs and vines, and let the river carry me back to my team. They were pretty surprised to see me floating up to camp after being gone for 3 days, but I was just relieved to be back in one piece. Xyloth shook his head in amazement. Your resourcefulness and adaptability are just astounding, Robert. It's like you're equipped to survive in any environment, no matter how challenging. Robert laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to fill the room. Well, I don't know about that, but I will say that growing up on Earth, you learn to expect the unexpected and to think on your feet. It's not just about physical toughness, but also about mental resilience and the ability to problem-solve in high-stress situations. Primus and Xyloth exchanged incredulous glances, marveling at Robert's seemingly endless supply of harrowing Earth stories. The human leaned back in his chair, a glint of mischief in his eye as he launched into his next tale. "Okay, so picture this," Robert began, his hands gesturing animatedly. "I'm up in the Rocky Mountains, enjoying a beautiful day of skiing with some friends. The sun is shining, the snow is perfect, and we're having a great time. But then, out of nowhere, this massive blizzard blows in and completely changes the game." Xyloth tilted his head, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I've read about blizzards. They're like sudden intense snowstorms, right?" Robert nodded, his expression turning serious. "Exactly. And this one hit us hard. Visibility dropped to nearly zero, the temperature plummeted, and the wind was whipping the snow around so fiercely that it felt like being pelted with tiny ice daggers. We knew we had to find shelter fast, but we were pretty far up the mountain, and the trails were quickly disappearing under the fresh snow." Primus frowned, leaning forward in concern. "So what did you do? How did you find your way to safety?" A smile tugged at the corner of Robert's mouth. "Well, first we huddled together and took stock of our supplies. We had some emergency blankets, a few energy bars, and a couple of flares in our packs. We knew we needed to stay together and stay warm, so we used the blankets to create a makeshift shelter against a large rock outcropping." Xyloth's eyes widened in disbelief. "You built a shelter in the middle of a blizzard?" Robert chuckled, nodding his head. "We had to. It was our best chance of surviving until the storm passed. We took turns going out to collect snow to melt for water, and we rationed our food carefully. It was a rough couple of days, huddled together in that tiny space, the wind howling outside and the cold seeping into our bones. But eventually, the blizzard blew itself out, and we were able to make our way back down the mountain to safety." Primus shook his head, marveling at the human's resilience. "I can't even imagine enduring something like that. The cold, the wind, the isolation. It must have been terrifying." Robert's expression grew thoughtful, his eyes distant as he recalled the memory. "It was definitely one of the most challenging experiences of my life, both physically and mentally. But you know, it also taught me a lot about the importance of preparation, teamwork, and staying calm under pressure. In a way, it's experiences like that that have shaped me into the person I am today." Xyloth leaned forward, his eyes shining with curiosity. "It's just incredible the way you've not only survived but thrived in the face of such adversity. It makes me wonder, what other kinds of challenges have you faced on Earth?" Primus and Xyloth exchanged incredulous glances as Robert grinned, leaning back in his chair. "Hyenas?" Xyloth repeated, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Aren't those the fierce predators known for their bone-crushing jaws and cunning pack tactics?" Robert nodded, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "That's right. They're often underestimated, but hyenas are incredibly intelligent and adaptable creatures, and let me tell you, encountering a pack of them in the wild is an experience you don't forget." Primus leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "So what happened? How did you come across these hyenas?" Robert took a sip of his drink, savoring the memory. "It was during a safari trip in the Serengeti. I was out with a guide, exploring the vast grasslands and observing the incredible wildlife. We were in an open-top jeep, watching a pride of lions in the distance, when suddenly our guide spotted something moving in the tall grass nearby." Xyloth tilted his head, intrigued. "What was it?" "At first we couldn't quite make it out," Robert continued, his voice low and dramatic. "But then, as we watched, a group of hyenas emerged from the grass, their powerful bodies slinking through the vegetation. There were about a dozen of them, and they were clearly on the hunt." Primus's eyes widened. "That must have been an intimidating sight. What did you do?" Robert chuckled. "Well, our guide knew better than to stick around. Hyenas are fiercely territorial and can be quite aggressive when they're in hunting mode. So, he started the jeep and began to slowly drive away, keeping a careful eye on the pack." Xyloth frowned. "But wait, didn't you say you had a run-in with them? How did that happen if you were driving away?" A mischievous grin spread across Robert's face. Ah, well, that's where things got interesting. As we were pulling away, I noticed one of the hyenas break off from the pack and start heading in our direction. It was moving fast, its powerful legs carrying it across the savannah at an incredible speed. Primus gasped. It was chasing you? Robert nodded. It seemed that way. Our guide stepped on the gas, trying to put some distance between us and the determined predator. But this hyena was relentless. It kept pace with our jeep, running alongside us as if it were toying with us. Xyloth shook his head in amazement. That's incredible. I had no idea they could run so fast. Oh, they're built for speed and endurance, Robert confirmed. But here's the thing. As I watched this hyena running next to us, I couldn't help but be struck by its raw power and grace. There was something almost mesmerizing about the way it moved, its muscles rippling beneath its spotted fur as it effortlessly kept up with our vehicle. Primus furrowed his brow. Weren't you scared, though? I mean, this is a wild predator we're talking about. Robert's expression turned thoughtful. You know, in that moment I wasn't scared. I was in awe. Here was this incredible creature, perfectly adapted to its environment, displaying the kind of strength and determination that we humans can only hope to emulate. It was a humbling experience, to say the least. Xyloth sat back in his chair, marveling at the story. It's amazing, the way you're able to find beauty and inspiration in even the most dangerous of Earth's creatures. I guess that's what makes humans so special. Your ability to connect with and appreciate the natural world, even in the face of adversity. Robert smiled, a faraway look in his eyes. I suppose that's true. Growing up on Earth, you learn to find the extraordinary in the ordinary, to see the wonder in the world around you, even when it's trying to eat you alive. He chuckled at his own joke. Primus shook his head, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You know, Robert, I'm starting to think that maybe Earth isn't so much a death world as it is a world that breeds a special kind of perspective. A perspective that allows you to face down hyenas and blizzards and all manner of challenges with a sense of awe and respect for the incredible planet you call home. Robert raised his glass, a twinkle in his eye. I'll drink to that, Primus. And you know, that actually reminds me of another close encounter I had, this time with a polar bear in the Arctic tundra. Primus leaned forward, fascinated by the notion of Robert caught in the midst of political turmoil. A political uprising in South America? That sounds like a dangerous situation to find yourself in as a foreigner. What happened? Robert took a swig of his drink, the memories of that chaotic time flooding back. It was during my post-college backpacking trip through the continent. I had just arrived in the capital city of this small, politically unstable country when tensions reached a boiling point. Protesters were flooding the streets, clashing with riot police. Xyloth's eyes widened. That must have been terrifying. How did you navigate such a volatile situation? It was definitely a challenge, Robert admitted. I had to rely on my wits and my ability to read people and situations quickly. I made sure to avoid the main areas of conflict and stuck to back streets and alleys. I also made a point of blending in as much as possible, dressing like the locals and keeping a low profile. Primus shook his head in amazement. But weren't you afraid of getting caught up in the violence? What if you had been mistaken for a protester or a journalist? Robert chuckled. Oh, there were definitely some close calls. At one point I found myself in the middle of a crowd that was being dispersed by tear gas. I had to think fast and use my knowledge of the city's layout to find an escape route. It was a heart-pounding moment, but I managed to stay calm and get myself to safety. Xyloth leaned back in his chair, marveling at the human's composure under pressure. It's just incredible the way you're able to maintain your cool in such high-stakes situations. I can't imagine most species having that kind of mental fortitude. It's not easy, Robert acknowledged. But I think part of it comes from growing up on a planet where you never quite know what challenges you might face from one day to the next. You learn to adapt, to think on your feet, and to trust your instincts. Primus nodded thoughtfully. It's like your entire species has been conditioned for survival through the trials and tribulations of life on Earth. It's no wonder you've been able to spread so far across the galaxy and make a name for yourselves. Robert smiled, a glint of pride in his eye. We've certainly had our share of struggles and setbacks, but I like to think that our resilience and adaptability have served us well. And you know, that actually reminds me of another time when those qualities were put to the test, during a massive earthquake in Japan. Primus leaned forward, his eyes shining with curiosity. A story from your childhood. Do tell, Robert. I'm always fascinated by the ways in which humans support and care for one another, even from a young age. Robert smiled, his gaze growing distant as he recalled the memory. It was back when I was about 10 years old, living in a small town in the Midwest. There was this family that lived down the street from us, a single mother with 3 young kids. They were going through a tough time as the mum had recently lost her job and was struggling to make ends meet. Xyloth tilted his head. That sounds like a difficult situation. How did your neighborhood respond? Well, at first I don't think many people were even aware of what was going on, Robert admitted. But one day my mum happened to run into the mother at the grocery store and noticed that she was only buying the bare essentials, bread, milk, and a few canned goods. When she asked if everything was okay, the mother broke down and confided in her about their struggles. Primus nodded thoughtfully. So your mother took it upon herself to help? Not just my mother, Robert said, a note of pride in his voice. She came home and immediately started calling up all the neighbors, organizing a community meeting to discuss what we could do to support this family. And the response was incredible. People from all over the neighborhood showed up eager to lend a hand. Xyloth's eyes widened. What kind of help did they provide? Robert leaned back, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. All kinds. Some people brought over bags of groceries and household essentials. Others offered to babysit the kids so the mum could go to job interviews. A few even helped her put together a resume and practice for interviews. It was like the whole neighborhood had mobilized to support this one family. Primus shook his head in amazement. That's incredible. And this was all organized by regular people, not any kind of official charity or government agency? That's right, Robert confirmed. It was just a bunch of neighbors coming together to help someone in need. And the best part was, it didn't stop there. Even after the mother found a new job and got back on her feet, the neighborhood continued to rally around them. People would drop off meals, offer to carpool the kids to school, and just generally make sure they knew they had a support system. Xyloth sat back, a look of wonder on his face. It's hard for me to imagine a community coming together like that, with no ulterior motive or expectation of reward. On my planet, people tend to look out for themselves and their immediate families, but the idea of extending that kind of support to a stranger. Robert nodded, a knowing look in his eye. It's not always easy and it doesn't always happen, but when it does, when a community really comes together to lift each other up, there's nothing quite like it. It's a reminder of the inherent goodness and compassion that exists within the human spirit, even in the face of adversity. Primus was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of Robert's words. You know, Robert, hearing these stories, it gives me a whole new perspective on humanity. I used to think of Earth as this primitive, dog-eat-dog kind of place, but now I see that there's so much more to it than that. The way you all support and care for each other, even in the toughest of times, it's truly remarkable. Robert smiled, a glint of pride in his eyes. We're a resilient bunch, that's for sure. And it's not just about surviving, but about thriving, about building something better together. That's what I've always loved about being human, the sense that we're all in this together, and that by lifting each other up we can achieve incredible things. Xyloth leaned forward, a mischievous grin on his face. Speaking of achieving incredible things, didn't you mention something earlier about a neighborhood coming together to build a community garden? A heavy silence hung in the air as Robert finished his story, the weight of his words settling over the room like a shroud. Primus and Xyloth sat motionless, their eyes fixed on their human friend, as if seeing him for the first time. Primus was the first to break the stillness, his voice soft and filled with empathy. Robert, I don't know what to say. I had no idea you had been through something so profound, so heartbreaking. Robert nodded, his gaze distant as he lost himself in the memories. It's not something I talk about often, but I felt like you both needed to know, to understand that being human isn't just about physical toughness or adaptability. It's about the emotional depths we're capable of, the bonds we form and the losses we endure. Xyloth leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. How did you cope with it all? Losing your friend, seeing his family go through so much pain? A sad smile tugged at the corner of Robert's mouth. I won't lie, it was the hardest thing I've ever faced. There were days when I didn't want to get out of bed, when I couldn't see the point in going on, but I had my community, my family, my other friends. We leaned on each other, we shared our grief and our memories, and slowly, day by day, we started to heal. Primus shook his head in wonder. The way your neighborhood came together, both when Jack's family was struggling financially and after his passing, it's remarkable. I've never seen anything like that on Ulia. Robert sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his emotions. It's not always like that, even on Earth. But in times of crisis, in moments of unimaginable loss, that's when you see the true strength of the human spirit. That's when you witness the power of empathy, compassion, and unconditional love. Xyloth reached out, placing a comforting hand on Robert's arm. Thank you for sharing this with us, Robert. I know it couldn't have been easy, but it's given me a whole new appreciation for the depth and complexity of the human experience. Robert looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I wanted you to know that being human is about more than just surviving against the odds. It's about the connections we make, the love we share, and the resilience we find in each other. It's about facing the darkest moments of our lives and somehow, some way finding the light again. As the three friends sat in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts, a new understanding settled over them. They had always known that humans were a remarkable species, capable of incredible feats of strength and adaptability. But now they saw the true essence of what it meant to be human, the capacity for profound emotion, the unbreakable bonds of community, and the unwavering resilience of the spirit. In that moment, Primus and Xyloth realized that they had only scratched the surface of the human experience, and as they looked at their friend, his eyes still haunted by the ghosts of his past, they knew that there was still so much more to learn, so many more stories to be told. Robert took a deep breath, the air heavy with the weight of his memories. You know, he began, his voice barely above a whisper, there was this one moment at Jack's funeral that I'll never forget. His mother, who had been through so much, who had lost her husband and now her only child, as she stood up to speak. And I remember thinking, how can she possibly find the strength? How can she stand there, in front of all those people, and say anything at all? Primus leaned forward, his eyes wide with anticipation. What did she say? Robert closed his eyes, the scene playing out in his mind as if it were yesterday. She looked out at all of us, her eyes red and puffy from crying, but her voice steady and clear, and she said, I want to thank you all for being here, for showing my son how much he was loved. Jack may have lost his battle with cancer, but he never lost his spirit, his joy, or his love for life. And that is because of all of you, because of this incredible community that lifted him up and carried him through the darkest of times. Xyloth felt a lump forming in his throat, his own eyes stinging with tears. That's beautiful and so true. The strength of a community, the power of love and support. It's what carries us through the unimaginable. Robert nodded, a single tear rolling down his cheek. She went on to say that Jack's legacy would live on, not just in our memories, but in the way we lived our lives. She challenged us to be kinder, to love harder, to cherish every moment we had with the people we cared about. Because in the end, that's what truly matters, the connections we make, the love we share, the impact we have on each other's lives. Primus sat back, his mind reeling with the implications of Robert's words. It's a powerful message, one that transcends species and cultures. We all have the capacity for love, for empathy, for resilience in the face of adversity, and it's those qualities that define us, that make us who we are. Robert looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. I think that's what I've been trying to tell you through all these stories. Being human isn't about the challenges we face or the obstacles we overcome. It's about the way we face them, the way we lean on each other, the way we find strength in our shared humanity. As the weight of Robert's words settled over them, Primus and Xyloth found themselves seeing their friend in a new light. He was more than just a tough, adaptable Deathworlder. He was a being of incredible depth and complexity, shaped by the joys and sorrows of a life lived to the fullest. And in that moment, they knew that they had only just begun to understand the true nature of the human spirit, a spirit that could endure the unimaginable, that could find hope in the darkest of places, and that could forge unbreakable bonds in the face of any adversity. Robert leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he lost himself in the memories of his fallen friend. "You know," he said softly, "there was this one thing Jack always used to say, whenever things got tough. He'd look at me with that crooked grin of his and say, 'Hey, Rob, remember, we're all in this together. No matter what happens, we've got each other's backs.'" Primus felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, despite the heaviness in his heart. "That sounds like something a true friend would say." Robert nodded, a wistful expression on his face. Jack was the kind of friend who always knew just what to say, just how to make you feel like you could take on the world. Even when he was fighting for his own life, he never lost that spark, that ability to lift others up. Xyloth tilted his head, a questioning look in his eyes. How did he manage to stay so positive, so hopeful, in the face of something so terrifying? Robert was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. I think it was because of his family, his friends, his community. He drew strength from the love and support that surrounded him, even in his darkest moments, and he never lost sight of what truly mattered, the people he cared about, the memories he had made, the life he had lived. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.